Well, it's the first time in 6 years that the UN has declared a famine worldwide. CGTN's Nick Harper takes a closer look at what has prompted the agencies to make such a serious declaration.
More than 3 years of civil war, drought and a collapsing economy has left Unity State in South Sudan in a precarious situation. The United Nations estimates that 100,000 people are now facing starvation and another 1 million people are on the edge of famine. And the UN is warning that that could spread further and could spread fast. It's now calling on international help and urgent humanitarian access to the areas affected. In the country as a whole, the UN says more than 40% of the country's population, about 4.9 million people, are considered to be severely short of food and in need of assistance. The World Food Programme Country Director for South Sudan, Joyce Loma, said the absence of meaningful peace and security meant this was a man-made famine. Well, a famine is defined as meeting certain hunger, malnutrition and death rate criteria, that at least 20% of households in the area face extreme food shortages, that acute malnutrition exceeds 30% and that the death rate exceeds 2 people a day per 10,000 people. To formally declare that South Sudan is suffering from famine means people there have already started to die from lack of food. And the fear is that the coming lean season in July could mean the number of people facing food insecurity rises from 4.9 million to 5.5 million. The UN has previously warned of potential famines in Somalia, Nigeria and Yemen, but the world's newest country, South Sudan, is the first place in 6 years to be declared as now suffering from a famine. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
Well, let's now get more on this worrying situation, and Fanny Kemonto, a nutritionist from Health Basics International, is joining us in studio here in Nairobi to discuss this worrying trend across the continent. Fanny, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. First off, just how bad is the situation? How affected is the continent by drought?
Well, generally speaking, the drought has affected most areas in Africa, and you find that the most affected people are the children because they're still growing and they need nourishment and everything else. So the main thing affecting the kids nowadays is the malnutrition problem. So generally, drought affects everyone in terms of poor feeding and generally poor health.
Well, aid agencies have been providing assistance there, but there are still warnings of widespread hunger. Why isn't it filtering down, and what is the situation there?
Well, there's a problem when widespread of hunger leads to probably migration, and this probably it's due to probably cheap labor and looking for other sources of, like survival and all that. So basically, health generally affects in terms of generally speaking, malnutrition is the main problem when it comes to drought. Yeah. So if maybe you can ask the question again. What did you ask?
Well, I was just asking about the interventionist methods being done by the aid agencies, yes. And yet we are seeing that the people on the ground are not receiving as much food as they should, leading to what you're mentioning, malnutrition. So yes. Where is the discrepancy here?
Yes, actually there's food aid, there's food going around, but I can say probably they're not supplying enough nutrients for the body. Yeah, so probably they find like maize, flour and all that. So you find basically they're providing starch, but there's not enough nutrients for the body. And then as much as they supply food, I think another thing that needs to be implemented is the supply of supplements that in order to keep up with the health of people around. So there's a supply of food, but there's also a shortage, and the population is also wide. So not everyone is able to access the food that is being supplied.
Right. So yes. This whole question of food insecurity, though, has been, quite rampant in some countries. I mean, Ethiopia has faced it at some stage. Somalia, Kenya is facing it at the moment, and now South Sudan is in such dire situation. So if you look across the continent, though, what needs to be done to ensure that countries can become food secure?
Well, especially looking at the most governments in most of our African countries, number one thing they need to do like a door-to-door your nutrition assessment to make sure if people are prone to health situations and all that. And apart from that, they need to like supply medical attention and all that. Another thing is school feeding programs. They need to be implemented very seriously. It's happening, but I could say they're not doing enough. They need to seriously look into the matter. And then another thing, people who are affected by the drought and famine need to be educated. Like probably they need to be told the health hygienes and simple agricultural methods, the way they can, get their own food and all that, how to preserve water when it rains so that they cannot be affected by floods. You find such areas are again affected by floods apart from the drought. So they need to be taught, they need to get educated on how to sustain their lives. In case they face such a disaster, they need to know how to prepare to handle the situation.
All right,
yes.
Fanny Kemonto, thank you very much for your insights.